One person's dead after being shot inside an apartment near Long Branch and Lakeshore in Etobicoke. It's one of 3 homicide investigations in the city right now. Big news in the Canadian auto sector. Honda is set to build an electric vehicle plant next to its assembly plant in Alliston. The deal involves $5 billion in taxpayer money and is expected to create at least 1,000 jobs. And the latest from the legislature, where there still is argument over wearing of the keffiyeh. Right now, MPP Sarah Jama has been asked about that. Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at Noon. I'm Bakari Savage. Let's go live to Queen's Park. This is where MPPs are speaking to the media after question period. Sarah Jama is speaking.
The repression against Palestinians and the anti-Palestinian racism in this place needs to continue to be called out. And I think it's upon all of us to fight injustice with our feet and hands, with our tongues, with our words, and in our hearts. And I think wearing the keffiyeh is the least we can do with 40,000 people continuing to be killed in the state of Palestine.
Why do you think the rules don't apply to you?
It's not that I think the rules don't apply to me. I think the rules don't apply to many people who have worn clothing around supporting Ukraine, or like I said, a member this morning, a colleague, who was wearing a tartan very intentionally, referring to the fact that he was wearing it politically and nothing occurred. So I think the rules are arbitrarily applied. Like I said, this keffiyeh has been worn by me specifically in this place before, and like even after October 7th and before October 7th, and yet this ban was arbitrarily put in place around February or March. So it's not that the rules don't apply to me specifically. The rules very specifically apply to anybody speaking up against genocide, against anti-Palestinian racism. Again, I say that this is a cultural piece of clothing. Every party leader has spoken up about how this ban shouldn't exist. The Premier has spoken about this ban needing to not exist, and yet his own members, the Conservatives, are the one consistently saying no to the removal of this ban. The Conservatives are making this political. The NDP, the Liberals, the Greens have all said that this ban should be removed. And so it is not that the rules don't apply to me. The rules very specifically apply to anybody speaking about anti-Palestinian racism. And that in and of itself is political, and that in and of itself is a testament to anti-Palestinian racism that is rampant here and across this country.
Are you worried about further repercussions now?
What other repercussions could possibly be put in place? I have already been censured. I am not allowed to vote today. I think this constant use of the process to threaten or to hurt people who are publicly trying to speak in favor of stopping the genocide, in favor of a ceasefire, in favor of allowing people to wear their cultural garments in political spaces. This is not just happening here at Queen's Park. This is happening in schools. This is happening in people's workplaces. This is happening across Ontario. And I am not okay with it, and a lot of people are not. And a lot of people have spoken up about, even in this place politically, how this is not okay. So there are no further repercussions. Like I said earlier, it's upon all of us to fight where we are at against injustice in all the ways that we can. My voice has already been taken. To ban staffers and political members of this place from just wearing a cultural piece of clothing, it is not okay. And I'm going to be continuing to do what I can to draw attention to the fact that 40,000 people have been killed. Millions of people have been displaced already before October 7th who are Palestinian from the state of Palestine. And that's continuing. We have people in this building who are walking around that have family members under the rubble right now in the state of Palestine. And that is not okay. And this is the least that we can be doing, is drawing attention to the fact that this cloth, which is cultural, is being politicized. We have staffers trying to enter the building who have not been allowed to wear their own cultural clothing. And no, I am not afraid of any further repercussions, because there's not more that can happen. What the government should be doing, if Doug Ford really believes in people being allowed to wear the keffiyeh in this place, which he has said numerous times, he needs to actually speak to his members and allow this to pass, or to move a motion himself to allow it to pass, because people have been talking about this for a while. And you know what? The truth is, the Conservatives are worried about the votes, the by-election in Milton. So on the one side of their mouth, he's saying he's against the ban. But on another side of their mouths, they say no during a unanimous consent vote. And that in and of itself is politicizing the use of the keffiyeh and the fact that people are being genocided right now. And this needs to come to an end. People need to be allowed to wear the keffiyeh here, and we need to be able to continue to fight against and talk about anti-Palestinian racism in this place and across the province.
All right, I just want to ask, though, this is a provincial legislature. It doesn't deal with national, international affairs. So why is this such a big issue here?
My question back to that
What does this have to do with provincial politics and running the province?
My question to that question is why, when another member was wearing a tartan, was he not asked to be removed?
That's not what I asked, though.
And I am allowed to answer how I would like to, if you would allow me to do so. Is that okay?
Sure, go ahead.
So my answer to you is that another member was able to wear today a political piece of clothing that he named as such, as being political, and was not asked to be removed. We've had members across this chamber wear clothing in support of Ukraine and other international issues, and this is an issue that's affecting people here as well. There are Palestinians that actually work in this building. There are Palestinians who are affected by decisions by this government, and if Doug Ford, our own premier, has even said that the ban shouldn't exist, they should move a motion in line with that.
Are you planning to come back and wear it again this afternoon?
Absolutely, I'll be back. I don't know about this afternoon, but I'll definitely continue as I'm here to continue to wear it.
What about your
You've been told if you're going
constituents?
to be allowed.
You've already been censored over this broad issue, and you said you don't vote, you can't speak in the same way. Like, are you not also elected to represent the people of Hamilton Centre who may not all feel as strongly about this issue as you do?
I can definitely still vote. Today I'm not allowed to vote. There's one issue before the House in terms of voting this morning. I have been voting. I have been showing up to vote. I am still on committee and able to participate as far as I know. And the judicial review is before the courts, and that should be resolved very soon. I don't think that the censure was okay, and I'm going to continue to fight against that. And people in my riding are very supportive. I have raised thousands upon thousands of dollars so far with my independent riding association. I plan to run again in 2026. And there are people across all parties in support of what I am doing and what I have been able to say. And again, I just want to take it back to the fact that there is a genocide going on, that 40,000 people have been killed, that there doesn't seem to be an end in sight despite the fact that everybody and their mother is now calling for a ceasefire. And that has to come to an end. And this is a cultural piece of clothing in support of people who are being genocided. And so we need to be centering the fact that people are dying. Across all ridings, people are affected, and this is a political issue, and my job is to be political. And so I will continue to wear this garment. I will continue to stand in support of staff who are trying to enter this building and hold on to the fact that, their people are being genocided. And I refuse to be afraid of participating as an elected member, representing the fact that there are people being genocided, and we are arguing about a cloth right now.
Have you had any more talks with Mard about going back into the...
Okay, we've been listening to MPP Sarah Jama, who has been censured for continuing to wear the keffiyeh in the Ontario legislature, which has been banned. The keffiyeh is a scarf traditionally worn by Palestinians, Muslims, and Arabs, but it has come to symbolize solidarity with Palestinians amid the Middle East conflict. She says that she will continue to wear it. Well, police are investigating 3 separate homicides in the cities. Police say that a man is dead after being shot inside an apartment near Lakeshore and Long Branch. It happened around 2:30 in the morning. The victim was rushed to hospital but later died. According to police, the suspects were males wearing face coverings who left in a white sedan. And a homicide investigation is underway after a man was pushed to his death from a balcony in downtown. This happened around midnight at Church and Shooter Streets. And police say that the victim was transported to hospital. That's where he was pronounced dead. Investigators are looking for 4 suspects, 2 male and 2 female. And police are also investigating a homicide near Lawrence and Morningside. Here's a live look at that scene. Officers were called to an apartment building yesterday around 11:30 in the morning for a medical complaint. They found a man dead inside a unit. Investigators have now determined the circumstances, a homicide.
I just know that when I came downstairs, after the guy harassed me, tried to choke me, he went into this apartment, 1211. 1211 he went. And next thing I knew, the paramedics and them were coming, saying it was a cardiac arrest. Of course, they can't say what happened. And I says, I think I know what happened already.
Police haven't yet said anything about possible suspects in the murder at the apartment building in Scarborough. Well, Honda has officially announced that it's going to be making a $15 billion investment in Ontario. The project will see the automaker build an electric vehicle battery plant next to its assembly facility in Alliston. That facility will be retooled to produce fully electric vehicles. Honda will also set up 2 battery parts facilities elsewhere in the province. The project is expected to create 1,000 new jobs and retain more than 4,000 existing ones. The deal doesn't involve production subsidies, but is expected to include up to $5 billion in public money.
Today, Honda is making Canadian automotive history. With this announcement, we will be investing to create Canada's first comprehensive electric vehicle supply chain from start to finish.
This is historic. It's the largest auto investment in Canadian history. It's a tremendous win for Ontario, for our workers, for all of Canada. Honda's new facilities will strengthen our electric vehicle supply chain, securing and creating thousands of new paying jobs across our province.
And the Honda facility will be the 3rd electric vehicle battery plant in Ontario. Well, a tentative deal has been reached between the Art Gallery of Ontario and its striking workers. The union says that the agreement was reached late last night after 16 hours of bargaining. More than 400 curators, designers, technicians, and front desk staff walked off the job a month ago. Key issues included better pay and less reliance on contract work. The Art Gallery of Ontario has been closed throughout the job action and labor talks, and deals of the tentative agreement haven't been released. Well, transit advocates, they're calling on the federal government to provide more funding for the TTC. The group, TTC Riders, were outside Spadina Station this morning, giving the Liberals a ticket for, quote, fund evasion. They say that they're disappointed that the latest federal budget didn't contain any funding for TTC safety and reliability. Advocates say that the TTC needs investments in state of good repair work, as well as new subway trains.
Our members of parliament have been asked nicely to pay their fair share for transit. They've been asked to chip in for new subway trains by Mayor Olivia Chow. They've been asked to accelerate the Permanent Public Transit Fund by the CEOs of Canada's 3 biggest transit agencies, and they've been asked by their constituents across the city. Federal MPs have been given enough warnings. Now we're giving them a ticket for fund evasion. It's time for our MPs to pay up.
The city has committed its share of funding, while the province has promised money only if it is matched by the federal government. Well, coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to take a look at what went wrong for the Leafs last night in Game 3. Leafs are down 2-1 in their best-of-7 series against the Boston Bruins. This is after losing Game 3 last night. So right now we're joined live by John Viveros, host of Hot Take Hockey Podcast. John, what happened?
Tough one to start at home. And I think when you look at the first 2 games in Boston, specifically the first game, probably an all-time low for Toronto, but you bounce back and you get a 3-2 victory. So coming home, you're expecting the Leafs to be ready, the Leafs to maybe even get an early goal. And I think there's so many storylines you could start with, but you don't get a goal in the first period. You do get the go-ahead goal with Matthew Knies, unbelievable play from Mitch Marner. But I think the fan base and a lot of the conversation around the Toronto media is still wanting more from Mitch Marner. I think 90% of his play so far has been underwhelming outside of that primary assist. So you look at that for 1. And 2, the Toronto Maple Leafs were 0 for 5 on the power play. If you look at the series as a whole, 1 for 11 on the power play. In Game 3, 0 for 5 on the power play. So that's a massive issue right now. We've always talked about special teams in the playoffs being a huge advantage to move on to the next round. And the Toronto Maple Leafs are just not excelling in that area. So both on the power play and penalty kill, it's a struggle. Boston continues to dominate on the power play and show their strength there. Toronto just...
Okay, you know what? Post-game interviews, there was a lot of frustration expressed. Talk about that.
For sure. I mean, you look at guys like Matthew Knies and even Sheldon Keefe talking about his frustration with Brad Marchand specifically and his antics. If you look at the Trent Frederick goal, which was a tying goal in the second period to make it 1-1. There was behind the play Brad Marchand and Tyler Bertuzzi getting into it. So Tyler Bertuzzi had some words after the game as well, and then specifically head coach Sheldon Keefe talked about how his antics for Brad Marchand is kind of perfected at this point, that he's just kind of been able to do that and stay under the radar with the refs. If you look early on in his career, he had a lot of suspensions, got in with conversations with the NHL, but now he's kind of been able to do his thing under the radar. And then specifically, it doesn't help that Brad Marchand ends up scoring the game winner and the empty net goal to put it away. So I think if you look at those interviews from the coach and from some players, the frustration was really clear, especially when you're talking about the first home game of the series ends up in a loss.
Okay, and the next game is going to be Saturday. Let's talk about regrouping. What do you expect to happen?
So you have some extra time. I mean, head coach of the Boston Bruins, Jim Montgomery, was not happy that there was extra days in between Game 3 and Game 4 here, both games in Toronto. So if you're Toronto, you take what Jim Montgomery said and you use that to your advantage. I think there's a couple key points to look at here. Is William Nylander going to be rested enough? And whatever he's been dealing with, will he be ready for Game 4? And on top of that, I think there was some conversations from people in broadcast and fans about just the fan base and the energy in the lower bowl in and around the game. So I think the fans got to be ready for Saturday, and I think the players themselves, you need that early goal. I go all the way back to last year against the Tampa Bay Lightning. When you lost that first game, Mitch Marner scored a goal in the first minute to get the fans really into it. We didn't see a goal until about the midway point of last night's game in the second period. So I really think if the Leafs want to get things going Saturday night and get a win in Game 4, you need to get an early goal. And as I said, you really need to figure things out on the power play.
All right, recapping Game 3 and looking ahead to Game 4. John Favreros, host of Hot Take Hockey Podcast. Thanks, John.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, a musical about Tim Hortons called The Last Timbit is set to premiere in Toronto this June. We're going to talk to the director next. A musical about people waiting out a snowstorm at a Tim Hortons is going to debut in Toronto in June. The fast food chain says that The Last Timbit will debut at the Elgin Theatre in Toronto this June. The production is loosely based on a 2010 snowstorm that was so bad that some in the Sarnia area had to wait out the weather at a local Tim Hortons. And right now we're joined live by Michael Rubinoff, the producer of The Last Timbit. Michael, you cannot get more Canadian than this.
Absolutely. This is going to be a huge celebration of Canadiana for sure.
Okay, so let's talk about this. What did it take to bring this from, that snowstorm to the stage?
Well, Tim Hortons wanted to find a way to celebrate their 60th anniversary in a really fun way that could connect Canadians. And when they approached this to me, as a musical theater producer, this made sense. This was a great way to tell a story. I mean, people don't realize Tim Hortons has been a part of Broadway. Their logos on the backdrop in Book of Mormon, Come From Away, of course, is associated with Tim Hortons in terms of the set. And they had secured some of the best writers in the country, Annika and Britta Johnson writing music and lyrics, and Nick Green writing the book. And all of this together was this phenomenal way to tell a story that, so many Canadians are connected to, that Tim Hortons, that's where people start their day. And here was a bit of an extended story where a group of strangers get stuck in a Tim Hortons and have to navigate their way through song, through humor, and through a lot of heart.
Michael, what can you tell us about the cast?
We're so lucky in this country. We've got some of the best talent in the world, and we're over the moon that we're going to have a number of stars from Broadway in this cast, including Jake Epstein and Shalina Kennedy, which both have been on Broadway, and Beautiful, the Carole King musical, Sarah Farb, another one of our great talents, Kimmy Tron. People have been at Stratford and Shaw on stages around the world. This is the real deal. It doesn't get more first class than this in our writing team, in our cast, in our creative team. And I think Canadians are really going to enjoy this and be surprised by it.
Michael, speaking of, take us through the roller coaster of emotions that the audience will go through when they sit for The Last Timbit.
Well, I think people are, the best is surprised. Okay, there's a great story and there are great characters that have been created by these writers. There's a conflict between a mother and daughter that I think people will connect with. And in waiting out the storm, this group realizes there's only one Timbit left. And they have to find a way to determine who gets that last Timbit. but you're going to have to come see the show to figure out how that all goes down. And I think in it is so much heart. But, it's funny, too, and it's really, really joyous. And I can't wait to share this with Canadians and have them leaving the theater humming these great songs.
Well, speaking of, share a little bit of personal pride from this production.
So much pride. I mean, to work with Tim Hortons, which is the most iconic Canadian brand that have taken this on and decided to put our artists forward and have the thrill of them wanting to tell a story in this way has just been huge for us. So I'm so proud, and I'm so proud that an incredible group of Canadians, our writers, Annika and Berta Johnson and Nick Green, to showcase more of their work, to showcase our talent. I think people are not only going to love this, but like me, I hope they're going to feel that pride radiating as they leave the theater. We've got the best talent in the world, and now we're going to get to showcase it in a really meaningful way.
Okay. Well, Michael, speaking of, I mean, you're behind Come From Away. We're talking about smash hits. Do we feel some awards coming on here?
Listen, I have a really good feeling about this one. I'll tell you. We hope big things for the last Timbits. So stay tuned, and we can't wait for the first audiences in Toronto to experience it. And we're going to go from there. But listen, we all love awards.
Michael Rubinoff, the producer of The Last Timbit. Thanks a lot for your time this afternoon.
Thanks so much.
And coming up on CP24 Live at noon, one person's dead. This is after being shot inside an apartment near Long Branch in Lakeshore in Etobicoke. Here's a live look from the scene. One person's dead after being shot inside an apartment near Long Branch in Lakeshore in Etobicoke. It's one of 3 homicide investigations in the city right now. Big news in the Canadian auto sector. Honda is set to build an electric vehicle plant next to its assembly plant in Alliston. The deal involves $5 billion in taxpayer money and is expected to create at least 1,000 jobs. An independent MPP, Sarah Jama, was ordered out of the legislature today after she arrived wearing a keffiyeh, but didn't leave. Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage. Well, police are investigating 3 separate homicides in the city. They say that a man is dead after being shot inside of an apartment. This is near Lakeshore and Long Branch. This happened around 2:30 in the morning. Here's a live look at the scene right now. The victim was rushed to hospital, but later died. According to police, the suspects, they're males wearing face coverings, and they left in a white sedan. And another homicide investigation is underway. This is after a man was pushed to his death from a downtown balcony. It happened around midnight at Church and Shooter Streets. And police say that the victim was transported to hospital. That's where he was pronounced dead. Investigators are looking for 4 suspects, 2 male and 2 female. And neighbors say that they have heard trouble in that apartment before.
Just like a lot of like banging, stuff being thrown around. I did hear like around 11:30 there was like a commotion in the hallway.
We saw in the morning like they were dusting off the fingerprints, I think, and we were just curious like what's happening around, and we just asked like, and we were like completely shocked because we didn't know like what's happening around, and yeah, it's scary.
And police are also investigating a homicide near Lawrence and Morningside. Here's a live look at that scene. So officers were called to an apartment building yesterday. This was around 11:30 in the morning for a medical complaint. They found a man dead inside a unit. Investigators have now determined the circumstances a homicide.
He was already dead and the people ran. The people scattered, run. And the police were going door to door to door, to floor, knocking to check the apartments. And I says, go ahead, check mine. Nobody comes in my house.
And police haven't yet said anything about possible suspects in the murder at the apartment building in Scarborough. Well, Honda has officially announced it's going to be making a $15 billion investment in Ontario. The project is going to see the automaker build an electric vehicle battery plant next to its assembly facility in Alliston. That facility will be retooled to produce fully electric cars. Well, Honda will also set up 2 battery parts facilities elsewhere in the province. And the project is expected to create 1,000 new jobs and retain more than 4,000 existing ones. The deal doesn't involve production subsidies, but is expected to include up to $5 billion in public money.
The workers in communities across the country seeing these jobs for the future. Places like Alliston, Bridgewater, Windsor, Brampton, St. Thomas, Ingersoll, Fort Saskatchewan, Bécancour, McMasterville, Saint-Basile-le-Grand, Maple Ridge, they get it too. We're building the careers of the future. Our economic policies, including our climate policies, are attracting global investors.
Today's announcement of Honda's estimated $15 billion investment with its joint venture partners will be a game changer for the industry. Once built and operational, Honda's massive new electric vehicle plant and EV battery facility here in Alliston will employ more than 4,200 people and have the production capacity to produce up to 240,000 electric vehicles each and every year.
We are confident that Canada has what is needed to build an EV value chain, from key materials to finished EVs. Here in Canada, we are very pleased to begin a new discussion toward achieving this major electrification milestone, which built on our ongoing project in the U.S.
The Honda facility will be the third electric vehicle battery plant in Ontario. And a tentative deal has been reached between the Art Gallery of Ontario and its striking workers. The union says that the agreement was reached late last night after 16 hours of bargaining. More than 400 curators, designers, technicians, and front desk staff, they walked off the job a month ago. Key issues included better pay and less reliance on contract work. The Art Gallery of Ontario has been closed throughout the job action and labor talks, and details of the tentative agreement, they haven't been released. And looking towards Queen's Park, independent MPP Sarah Jama arrived to the legislature wearing a keffiyeh today and was ordered out but chose not to leave. So she spoke to reporters after question period.
This cloth, which is cultural, is being politicized. We have staffers trying to enter the building who have not been allowed to wear their own cultural clothing. And no, I am not afraid of any further repercussions, because there's not more that can happen. What the government should be doing, if Doug Ford really believes in people being allowed to wear the keffiyeh in this place, which he has said numerous times, he needs to actually speak to his members and allow this to pass, or to move a motion himself to allow it to pass, because people have been talking about this for a while.
The speaker had asked Jama to leave when she first arrived and outlined the consequences.
Sarah Jama, you are named. You must leave the chamber. The member is currently not eligible to be recognized in the House pursuant to the Order of the House adopted October 23, 2023. As a result of being named, the member for the remainder of the day is ineligible to vote on matters before the Assembly, attend and participate in any committee proceedings, use the media studio, and table notices of motion, written questions, and petitions.
And the checkered keffiyeh scarf is worn by Muslim, Arab, and Palestinian peoples, but it has also come to symbolize solidarity with Palestinians amid protests in the wake of October 7th. The legislature has a rule against members using props, signage, or accessories to express a political statement, which the House Speaker says the scarves do. Two separate motions to reverse the ban failed to pass this month. New condo sales in the GTA hit their lowest level since the 2009 last quarter. And that's according to a report from Urban Nation, which shows just over 1,400 new condos were sold from January to March in the Toronto area. Urban Nation President Sean Hildebrand says that after 2 years of pre-construction sales trending down sharply, construction activity is being hit hard. High interest rates are a major driver of slowing construction. This is according to Urban Nation. Well, speaking of real estate experts, they're expecting a flood of cottage listings following changes to capital gains tax in the federal budget. NCTV National Scott Hurst is looking at this. Scott, what is prompting the sale of cottages?
Good afternoon, Bakari. At the very least, lots of uncertainty for Canadians who own cottages or secondary investment properties as the federal government continues to face pushback over changes and the change to raise taxes on capital gains. And so here in the GTA, of course, when we're talking about cottage country, that means the Muskoka region, that means Haliburton, the Kawarthas, and a lot of uncertainty right now as cottage owners or those with secondary properties may be on the hook for tens of thousands more in taxes if they're looking to sell or transfer those vacation homes, or potentially hundreds of thousands for more expensive properties, and those generational properties potentially hardest hit here. Some owners are concerned they might need to sell their cottages now to avoid paying more in federal tax, and realtors and tax specialists tell CTV News they're getting a flood of panicked phone calls right now. A lot of people asking how these changes may affect them. Ottawa has said this change will only affect a small fraction of individuals, most notably forcing wealthier Canadians to pay more, but not everyone is convinced it'll only affect the rich. Now, the best advice that we're getting is talk to a realtor or tax specialist before making any significant long-term decisions. Here, Bakari.
Hey, well, Scott, is now a good time to pick up a deal in cottage country?
Well, that might be the potential silver lining in all of this. There may not be a flood of listings, as it takes a lot of time to, if you're not ready to go right now, list a home, sell a home, and to close. It takes typically 25 to 30 days here, and this changes. They come into effect in 2 months' time. So there's been an overall slowdown in demand following the pandemic for cottages, although there's talk of a rebound in the cottage market in 2024. Realtors say some owners, because of the tax changes, may rush to sell their properties now before the rules take effect exactly 2 months from now, and it could lead to more inventory and lower prices. But of course, Bakari, there are other market realities at play here that have kept many people on the sideline, and of course that has to do with high interest rates that have affected homeowners and prospective homeowners, Bakari, for quite some time now.
Okay, CTV National Scott Hurst. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Bakari.
Well, Harvey Weinstein's 2020 rape conviction in New York has been overturned by the state's top court. The disgraced former Hollywood producer is currently serving a 23-year sentence. The Court of Appeal has ordered a new trial for him, and it ruled that the judge was prejudiced Weinstein with improper decisions, including allowing women to testify about allegations that weren't part of the case. And despite the ruling, Weinstein will remain behind bars because he was convicted in Los Angeles in 2022 of another rape and sentenced to 16 years. And Donald Trump returned to a New York City courtroom for day 3 of his hush money trial. This is after being denied permission to skip today's proceedings. Well, Trump instead wanted to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, which is also hearing arguments today on whether he should be immune from prosecution for his actions during his time as president. The judge in his criminal trial denied that request, and the former president criticized that decision outside the Manhattan courthouse this morning.
The argument on immunity is very important. The president has to have immunity. This has nothing to do with me. This has to do with a president in the future, for 100 years from now. If you don't have immunity, you're not going to do anything. You're going to become a ceremonial president. You're just going to be doing nothing. You're not going to take any of the risks, both good and bad. I mean, you're going to make some great decisions and save the country, and you're going to make some decisions which are unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But you're not going to do anything if you don't have immunity, because otherwise you're going to be prosecuted after you leave office.
Well, jurors in New York are hearing more witness testimony from a longtime tabloid publisher. Trump also faces a looming decision over whether he violated a gag order imposed by the judge. He faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in connection with an alleged scheme to bury embarrassing stories about him during the 2016 campaign. Well, John Misick is the politics editor at MassLive.com, and he joined us live with more on Trump's court cases.
The matter before the Supreme Court today is a matter of presidential immunity. I mean, there could be waves across all of the legal actions that Donald Trump faces. The president former president, pardon me, would still be allowed to campaign as this is going on. He could conceivably even win re-election as his appeals and everything else are making their way through the courts. He would not presume be allowed to pardon himself if it gets that far, but we are definitely moving into uncharted waters here.
Trump has denied any wrongdoing and claims that he's a victim of political persecution. Well, Loblaws is continuing to face public pressure in the rising price of groceries. A petition calling for the company to be investigated for greedflation has been signed by over 95,000 people. The petition is calling for an investigation of Loblaws for inflating grocery prices and calling on the government to introduce legislation that will prevent the further monopolization of essential goods. A month-long Loblaw boycott is set to begin May 1st. Well, speaking of groceries, it appears that more Canadians are pushing the limits of what's safe to eat as we continue to grapple with high grocery prices. A survey by Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab found that almost 60% of those polled say that they're willing to eat food past its best before date. However, 20% say that they think they got sick from eating expired food. Nearly half report doing more to try and make their food last longer, including freezing it. Environment Canada senior climatologist Dave Phillips spoke to us about the roller coaster weather that we've been experiencing.
What we're going to see now in the next couple of days is it's going to warm up. We might even hear a thunderstorm because we're going to get this warm, moist air and, of course, very humid air from the south, Gulf of Mexico air. So, my gosh, it's from frost to actually temperatures that could be 7-8 degrees warmer than you normally would see. But, hey, it's a warm rain that we're going to get. But it just shows you that very fickle and fitful kind of weather that April often features.
All right, so looking ahead, the temperature Monday, it could hit 23 degrees. But right now, it's time to check on traffic because it's feeling like 2 degrees outside. It's 12:44. Adjua NCA Abois has the traffic report for us.
Yeah. You know what? Hey, good afternoon. I was going to say good morning, but it is the afternoon. And if you're making your way out, I do have some good news if you're starting on the eastbound lanes of the 401. Still a slow go through Weston Road. In the collector's zone, we had long-standing problems. This is why there's a major delay on the eastbound 401 through Weston. Collision was tying up the right lane. Everything there cleared. Now, the jam-ups continue on the eastbound 401 all the way out towards about Dufferin in the Express. This is where you are running into another long-standing collision. Still there blocking the left lane and shoulder. Now, a big hiccups for your commute if you're a westbound 401 commuter. If you're on the westbound side, we have this lane realignment in the Express. A lot of lanes are out. It does look like only the 2 left lanes are getting by. This expected to last until the end of the year. This is happening between Yonge and Avenue Road. And if you're on the 427 making your way southbound in the Express or Dundas, just a heads up, crews on scene with a stall off to the side, but emergency crews are blocking the left lane. Outside of camera view, just a reminder, we are dealing with a collision on Pharmacy just south of McNichol. Bakari, I'll send it back to you.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by CapitalDirect.ca.
Well, the city's making improvements to litter bins in an effort to clean up streets and parks. The enhancements include wider openings for trash and recycling, a stronger closing hinge, adjustments to the locking mechanism, and the introduction of 2 garbage options per bin instead of 2 recycling options. The enhancements are coming at no extra cost to taxpayers after the city worked with the service provider to improve the design.
These enhancements were tested and monitored in 4 downtown bins between December 23rd and January 24th, and they work well. Additional bins will be installed this week. And this is 1,000 more bins in busy areas, plus another 100 in the busiest area across mostly downtown.
All right, staff will also be checking on the bins at least once a week to monitor how the improvements are faring. Well, a couple from Lakefield, Ontario has 70 million reasons to celebrate after winning a massive Lotto Max jackpot.
I had the OLG website up and I said, do you want to check these numbers, please?
So I'm going across and I'm going, oh, we won 70,000. He goes, look at it again.
And the bells and whistles went off and it was $70 million.
And then I just started crying and he started crying and that was it.
That's Doug and Enid Hannon. They took home the top prize in the draw February 20th. Enid purchased a ticket from a grocery store. It was a lucky ticket. They kept the windfall a secret for nearly 2 months while getting financial advice. And the Hannons say that they plan to use some of the money for travel and to make renovations to their home. Well, coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to be joined by the director and the subject of the opening night film, of hot dogs. Stick around. Canada's largest documentary film festival. It kicks off today in the city, Hot Docs, which will feature 168 documentaries from 64 countries with 51 world premieres. It's going to happen over the next 11 days. And the documentary Luther, Never Too Much, which is the title of one of his songs, is going to open the festival. And right now we're joined live in studio by director Don Porter and musician Valerie Simpson. So I have to say this. He was affectionately nicknamed the Black Pavarotti. What was it like putting this together?
You know, it was such a joy to work on this movie. Of course, I was always a huge fan of Luther's, but to be able to revisit so many interviews that he'd done, so much footage, and then I learned so much about him. You know, when you're a fan, you don't necessarily know the history, and that's what was so great about making this film. In addition to, of course, being able to meet superstars like Valerie Simpson, you know, my new friend.
Well, speaking of, what was it like being friends with Luther?
Well, we traded secrets. He had a great admiration for my singing, which I found out. And we loved background, and we started in commercials together before he got famous and before I had big hits. So we had a lot going on, and he was just a joyful man in terms of comedy. He was so funny. I mean, he would just have you cracking up.
Well, what about the R&B climate, R&B zeitgeist of the 80s? Let's talk about that. This was like the heyday, the 80s and then the early 90s.
Well, you know, he meant a lot he was like an icon to black women, really and truly, because it was like when he sang, he was singing to you. He was singing your life. And we didn't know that he wasn't singing his own life. And we didn't know anything personal about him. But he gave everything to us. And I think that's why he was so popular, because we were so raw and so honest.
Along with that, Ms. Porter, talk about some of the things that you learned, because you said that you just learned so much.
Yeah. You know, I mean, first of all, I didn't know he was on one of the early episodes of Sesame Street. So Luther was in a band, Listen My Brother, a singing group, Listen My Brother. And Sesame Street was created to educate black and brown children, to give them preschool education. And so they invited this group, Listen My Brother. And so we have Luther in the film singing the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s. But hip, exactly. And then, of course, I didn't know about, just like Valerie Simpson and Roberta Flack, that all these major artists sang jingles before they were famous. You know, like if we did their behind the music, like this would be their behind the music. But I think one of the other huge things that I didn't know was his relationship with David Bowie. And so we have footage of Luther as a very young man kind of just stepping in, and David Bowie recognizing his talent and then inviting him to not only be on Young Americans, but then Luther ends up arranging that album with David Bowie as a very young man and going on tour. And his career just took off from there.
He was a great writer of songs, you know, and a producer. People don't give him that credit.
And then also, speaking of, you know, the title of this is Never Too Much. If you do that rip that's right at the top,
I think you have a future.
Let's talk about that, how innovative he was as a musician.
Absolutely. I mean, he brought the best. Marcus Miller is very prominently featured in this, and, you know, he speaks of him highly, too. He just really, he had all the gifts. I mean, people don't realize one of his songs is in The Wiz, you know, Brand New Day that he wrote, you know. So it's just, his gift was so all-encompassing that he doesn't get his proper due. So that's why I'm so glad you did what you did, because it's almost 20 years. We have not given him his props.
Ms. Simpson, I was just gonna say, to this day, I still go out and I'll hear, you know, you'll hear the DJ and you go, was that some Luther? And you have the younger generations listening to this and dancing. What does that mean?
You know, one of the things that has been so gratifying about doing this movie is it's a movie to celebrate Luther, but it's also a movie to celebrate so many of our black artists that have contributed so much to the musical canon of the world. And so as you go through this film, you start to remember, just as Luther honored the women in particular who came before him.
And Ms. Simpson, we have about 10 seconds left. What are your final words about this project, your experience, your friendship?
Well, it takes somebody with an eye and a knowledge and a heart to want to bring this person to the world, because his audience was, I would say, Black America, but he was trying to have a bigger audience, and he was just about to do it with Dance with My Father, and then he was taken from us. So thank you for bringing him back, and we're gonna make him bigger than ever.
He was friends with David Bowie. I didn't know that.
We're gonna make him bigger than ever with this.
All right, Luther, Never Too Much is going to be opening the Hot Docs Festival. Don Porter, Valerie Simpson, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks
and your
for having
contribution.
us.
And thank you for watching CP24 Live at Noon.